Hey everyone. Hope you are all doing well out there in what I guess is now a pop culture miasma. A lot of news been flying around lately. I've been working on videos like a lot of other YouTube channels, and I've been seeing all the news flying around about Indiana Jones 5 at the Cannes Film Festival and Disney's woes financially, and them firing a bunch of people at Pixar, and uh, the Fortune magazine article that everybody's been talking about. It's looking grim, and I'm unfortunately not here to impart any sense of hope. But there is something that I've been working on for a while, and it's weird. The more I work on the video and the longer it takes, the more develops that then reinforms this video that I'm working on, and it's a video called Benevolence versus Payback. And it's all about what's going on in pop culture right now and what's going on in specifically the movie and television space, with Disney playing a large part in this. I said years and years ago, when I did a video about Solo, just an off the cuff unplugged like this about Solo, that everybody has their personal politics, but people who have a fatal lack of creativity will always put their personal politics out front, whereas other people who are more confident in their storytelling abilities and have something important to say, or have a point of view, or just have a galvanizing story, they don't generally have to do that. And even if their point of view comes through in that art, which typically it does, it comes through in a way that is universally meaningful to anyone watching. So the example I used at the time was George Lucas is very left, Clint Eastwood is very right by comparison. Both of those men went through their careers never having political fingers pointed at them from the other side of the aisle, because they were telling stories that resonated with anybody that watched them. They were able to maybe compartmentalize or even get down to the human truth, the human challenge, the human story that was in there. And I think part of that is still ringing true right now as the problem in Hollywood, specifically Disney. You have people like Kathleen Kennedy who are they dating all the way back to that video I did about Solo, and even before, going all the way back to Force Awakens. They are fundamentally lacking in any amount of inspiration or creativity. They only know how to do things one way, and it's about injecting themselves into the story, and operating on narratives and some kind of personal agenda. That doesn't make for great entertainment. And right now you're probably saying, well, Michael, thanks, Captain Obvious, that we've heard all that already. But I was thinking about it, from another perspective, and that perspective is what started this whole idea of doing this video that I'm working on called Benevolence versus Payback. We go back to 1995. Let's take the Wayback Machine to 1995. And George Lucas announces one last time, Star Wars trilogy, one last time as you remember it. The outrage since that moment has never ceased, and for good reason. Because nobody likes having their options taken away from them. We are now living in a time where a large group of people feel like in the pop culture space, their options have been taken away from them. And in a lot of respects, they're not wrong. The example that I'm going to be using in this video is the television show She-Hulk. I will not be going into a lot of depth about the show in the video that I'm going to be doing. The video is not about the show. It's just using it as a springboard to talk about the backlash and the outrage that's manifested from that. And I make the point in the video that I'm working on that, for a long time, up until about a decade ago, or half a decade ago, I guess, there was not this backlash that we now have towards various movies and television shows. And the example I used is, there's been entertainment written for women for a long time. I see She-Hulk, by and large, barring a few things the producer said, as, if you take a step back from it, it's a superhero show primarily aimed at women. That's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that fundamentally. So why was there the backlash? And why does the backlash continue to increase? Well, look at what happened leading up to the release of She-Hulk in the rest of the pop culture space. You have Star Trek turned on its head. You have Doctor Who in a mess. You have Star Wars repeatedly turned on its head in ways that the general audience can't even figure out, let alone the male audience. And then you have James Bond, who fumbled and punched his way through a 5-series cycle of uneven movies that culminated in the most maudlin, uninspired 3-hour slog I've ever sat through, No Time to Die. And you want to step back and think about that for a minute, because if you're not in the shoes of one of the people that didn't like She-Hulk, well, you need to try and put your feet in those shoes for a minute. Because what they've been told for the last 10 years is, we want more stuff to get out there that we want to watch. Okay, no one wants to stop you from doing that. Nobody of a reasonable mindset. And then they say, and this is the kicker, they say, but all the stuff that you like is bad. We're not going to make any more of the stuff that you like. Whatever you traditionally like, it's bad. And you need to see it as bad. And if you don't, then there's nothing we can do to help you. And we want you to go away. That is, if you boil it down, taking away people's options. I firmly believe that a lot of films from the past that people are presently finding objectionable in no way intended to harm anyone. There were some that did, and they have been summarily judged on, the ash heap of history. Birth of a Nation is one. Not the most recent one, the one way back in the day, the silent film. Those films that you may not like because they're just not your cup of tea, from, say, the 70s or the 80s, not all of them were out to get you. A lot of them were just films that took a point of view or a style or had a script that you don't like, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that those movies were trying to harm you or trying to harm your group of people or trying to malignantly hurt somebody. Most movies are trying to entertain the broadest swath of people possible, no matter what era you're talking about. There are films, as I said, that were made by, sleazy people that were made to send bad messages. There's no denying that. But they are in the vast minority of movies of the past, especially the recent past. Let's take James Bond. Roger Moore James Bond movies of the 70s. They were cheeky. They were, lighthearted. They were unrealistic. They were romps. Do they have things in them that don't reflect the society of 2023? Of course, because it's the past. It's why we don't stone people to death anymore, because guess what? That was a stupid thing in the past. But I don't think James Bond of the 70s had anything in it that was tantamount to stoning people in the street. James Bond of the 70s weren't out to harm anybody. They weren't. They were out to entertain as many people as possible, because James Bond was and should still be a mainstream franchise for the general audience. Women, men, kids, all alike. So I find it fascinating that the last 5 Bond movies really took it to a level where kids couldn't really go to see those anymore unless you were just a really cavalier parent. And then on top of that, they made them so unappealing, and they did to Bond what they did to Luke Skywalker. They made him such a broken character that nobody could have fun watching those movies. The vast majority of the audience did not. We did not respond well to them by the end. Oh, sure, we were hyped by Casino Royale, good movie, but it very quickly started to drop off after that. We all know it. And that means that option was no longer available to somebody who was then looking for movies to go to, and they were hanging on characters like Captain America and Hulk and Thor and Iron Man to try and recapture some of that experience that they had when they remembered having fun at the movies. I think more options is always great, but taking away options wholesale, that's never a good strategy. And Disney and Lucasfilm and recently Marvel, they've been doing a lot of that. A lot. And I don't even dislike a lot of the things that they've done. So for example, I liked She-Hulk, but again, I read the comic book growing up, and I want to be clear. Just because I liked it, it doesn't mean that people that don't like it are necessarily bad people. And it also doesn't mean that I don't understand why they didn't like it. I understand why they didn't like it. And part of it has to do with the fact that there were no options available to them to choose something else. You've got a whole era of, movies and television shows that allowed female characters to poke fun at guys, and She-Hulk could have been the superhero equivalent of that, and should have been in the eyes of most of the audience if they had not messed up and done all this stuff to all these other genres that men typically would have chosen to go see. But that ship has sailed for some reason, and we're now living in a time where options aren't good. Options are bad. There are no options. It is you either get on board or you get gone. And that is not a good strategy to employ. It really doesn't. When you paint someone an enemy, and then you paint that enemy into a corner, what else can you expect from that life form but, fight or flight? And I think in our pop culture space and in our fandoms right now, that's what we're seeing. And I don't think that all of it is unwarranted. Sure, there's always going to be people on the internet who are hyperbolic. They go to extremes. They're the kind of people you wish wouldn't represent your group, or your message board or your fan base or whatever it is. They're always there. And those people, they're twitchy, and, back in the days before the internet, their families had to keep them out of sight of the neighbors. And that, they're going to be there no matter what. But the vast majority of people that I've encountered on the internet, even when I didn't agree with them, they haven't been lunatics. Some are. Some even have platforms. There's no denying that. But all this stuff going on with Indiana Jones now, he's the next James Bond to come down the conveyor belt of, it looks like this is going to be a beached whale of a movie. Like, it looks like this is not going to end well for this franchise. Another hero that had a series of films that truly weren't out to hurt or demean anybody are now being treated as if they had been. And they're being sort of, I guess you could say, not punished, but castigated for their alleged sins of the past. I can't get behind the idea of, if I don't like it, it must be offensive. If I don't like it, it must mean it's out to get me. If I don't like it, it must mean that it has to go away and never be emulated ever again. How's that working for the industry right now? How's that working for Hollywood taking all the options off the table? I think I said in the solo video, and if I didn't, I'll just repeat it here. Corporate Hollywood has this attitude. It always does when they buy an IP. They have this attitude that we want this thing because it's really successful. So we're going to option it or license it or buy it outright. When we get it, the first thing we're going to do is try and change all of it, because the first thing out of their mouths is always, well, we wanted the brand, but we don't want the audience. The pre-existing audience for this brand, we don't want. We want another audience. We've made them up in our heads, but we want another audience. So you don't equate or realize that the reason the brand was successful is because it had already found its audience. And the audience was keeping it afloat even in the drought, even in those spans of time when nothing new gets made. The audience found the property and made it perennially successful. Even when there were no TV shows and there were no movies, such as with Doctor Who and Star Wars and Star Trek and Indiana Jones and all these things. Nope. We got to go find another audience. We don't want this audience. Well, if you kick this audience out, you have lost the brand too. And it has happened every time. For an audience that is, one, not really there, and two, made up in their minds of people who were not the audience that found it to begin with. Now, I think it's great to bring more people in. Always bring more people in. Don't kick more people out. It's a disturbing consistency amongst these Hollywood creative types, these creativity by committee people, that they don't want the audience. They don't want the entity, the collective group that made that property worth $4.5 billion to purchase. It's a real cognitive dissonance, but it's there, and they employ it every time. It's amazing to watch. You can almost call it like a clock. Like it happens every time. And especially, and I think I said this in the solo video, I might have said it in another thought piece, but especially in the case of Star Wars, that was hilarious to see, because you don't get a more mainstream, universal, massive audience than Star Wars. You don't get more general appeal than Star Wars already had. That's the tragedy of Star Wars, is that all they had to do was simply bring in some new characters and not try to re-inform the old characters. Either leave them out or leave them who they were so that everybody gets to enjoy something. Because all you've done now is you've tried to court an audience on the roll of the dice that you were only marginally successful in bringing some of them in. Meanwhile, you've totally turned away the people that made that thing a $4.5 billion valued license. Or franchise, I should say. And you've left a trail of wreckage, cinematic wreckage, that most people don't want to revisit. And it already is a law of diminishing returns. All they had to do was say, hey, we're going to make more Star Wars. And hey, we're going to have some new adventures. And hey, we're going to introduce you to some new characters at the same time. And hey, some of your old favorites are going to be there too. Not reinvented. They might be there. They might come back. You might see a few things. They are getting older, but you might see a few characters you remember, but we're not going to try and destroy them. We're not going to try and wreck them. We're not going to deconstruct them. We're just going to let them be there. That would have been nice. It would have been nice with Indiana Jones too. But it looks like it's not shaping up that way. I mean, if the BBC review is any indication, I do see the BBC as far as their movie reviews go, they have no reason to lie, and they had one of the most damning criticisms of the new film. It's a sad state of affairs, and the saddest part, I think, fundamentally, is we are living in a time where corporations don't see the value in giving customers options, and they also don't see the value in maintaining the existing audience while reaching for those newcomers. They want to do an oil change. They want to flush the system and start over. I mean, speaking of cars, when John DeLorean worked at Pontiac, he didn't throw away the car that he turned into the GTO. He made sure that the people that enjoyed that base car for what it is were still able to buy it exactly the way they wanted it. He gave them an options package to buy it with a bigger engine called the GTO. He gave people options. Disney needs to learn how to do that, because what else do we have from Disney right now? They own everything, pretty much. And all they're doing is what I just said to Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Marvel, not giving people options, making a lot of bad films, telling people who are looking for options the things you like are bad, and we're not making anything like that ever again, and we hope the rest of the industry doesn't make anything like that ever again. You will never see another Die Hard or a Lethal Weapon ever again. You will never see those. I'm glad you liked them, but they're gone now. Oh, and roll the dice and see if James Bond ever gets fun again for you. We hope it doesn't. Great, thanks. But in the background, they're also just remaking their own stuff. Little Mermaid, Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. I mean, name them. Maleficent. They're just retreading over their old crap, because they don't have any creative brain trust left in the company. They have corporate people. They have completely flushed the system and populated it with corporate people. And you know what I've said about that in the past, and corporate people think playing in this space is fun because they've never done it before. They don't know how, but they want to get in there and do it and say that they were able to do it because it's fun. To them, it's tantamount to finger painting. And they're not good at it. They're very, very bad at it, and they get to make the decisions. And that's the real tragedy. And options are now out the window. You're going to have to really dig back into the back catalogs at this point if you're looking for something to really entertain you. And I'm sorry to say that. Like, again, I'm saying that as somebody who was able to compartmentalize and say, yeah, if the landscape were different, I think people would have received She-Hulk much differently, as an example. Sure, there are some things that are going to be bad or poor right on their face, fundamentally. And I've seen some of those as well, come out of Marvel and definitely Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to imply for a minute that, oh, if we could have still gotten a traditional James Bond movie, that people wouldn't have seen The Force Awakens as a bad film, or The Last Jedi. Those films were bad on a cascading level of failure. Like it was, it was a pratfall down a flight of stairs. It was that bad. But with some of these shows where the backlash is beginning to increase in the wake of everything that we've experienced, and now with Indiana Jones 5 looming on the horizon as this final insult to all of this, the backlash is going to continue to increase because you continue to take away people's options, and that corner you're painting them into gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when Indiana Jones 5 comes out. I will be very curious to see what happens with this. I already know that the film is going to be a disappointment for me because I've talked about that already in past videos. I won't go over that again. As a learned Indiana Jones fan, a lifetime embedded Indiana Jones fan, I know for a fact that this whole franchise has gone sideways for a really long time, and I won't go over that again. Since before Indy 5, but I'll be very interested to see what this movie's performance does to affect the landscape of filmmaking in popular culture in the near future. It's going to be a make or break thing. If they learn I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to learn the right lessons from it, but if by some miracle they do learn the right lessons from it, then, I hope and pray that they will, spend a few years righting the ship and I know this is way wishful thinking, but spend a few years eating some crow and then saying, okay, we're gonna try and redefine our legacy here. This was all a big mistake. They may not ever say that publicly, but maybe they can quietly erase some of this stuff that they've done. But I don't have a lot of hope in that because corporations are single brain cell animals. They kind of move through life just doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for the same result over and over again, which is more profit, more profit, more profit, more profit, more growth, more quarterly earnings, more this, more that. And growth is not, perennially sustainable. Growth always has an end. Empires have an end. Is this the end of Rome? Is Disney burning? Looks like it could be, but I haven't seen the flames lick past the rooftops yet. Indy 5 could be an indicator of that. I'll be very curious to see what happens here in the next few months. It's a shame that these companies forgot the value of giving people choices. And the irony of it is that, or the tragic coincidence, I guess, is not so much an irony. The tragic coincidence, I don't want to misuse irony, is that Disney was the first one to pull these kind of stunts with the vault, the VHS vault back in the day. Oh, this won't be around much longer and you won't know when we're going to bring it out again. And then George Lucas found that idea very appealing, and he decided to do one better and take away that group's choice forever. And we've been living with the burgeoning vitriol of that ever since. And it could all have been so easily avoided. Even the most recent dust-ups could have been avoided if they'd just given the audience choices and looked at the audience and said, thank you for keeping this franchise viable for so long. We're going to go try some new things over here, but we want you to know that we're not going to abandon you over here. That would have gone a long way. But they didn't do that. So, I don't know how many of you guys are out there looking forward to Indy 5, but as Morgan Freeman said in The Dark Knight, good luck.